Let me ask you something. What happens when a Christian prince with 40,000 men faces an Ottoman invasion force of 120,000? What happens when that prince is outnumbered 3-1, defending a small country that everyone expects to be crushed? You're about to find out. And I promise you, the answer involves one of the most complete military annihilations in history. 45,000 Ottoman soldiers dead in a single day. The rest fleeing through frozen swamps and winter forests, hunted for 30 miles by Moldavian cavalry that showed no mercy. This is the Battle of Vaslui, January 10, 1475, the day Stephen the Great, Prince of Moldavia, took everything the Ottoman Empire could throw at him and turned it into a frozen graveyard. The day maimed II, conqueror of Constantinople, learned that some men refuse to kneel no matter what army you bring. And the day Europe remembered that the Ottomans could be beaten. This wasn't just another border skirmish. This was maimed II committing 3 entire armies, 120,000 men, to crush a principality most Europeans couldn't find on a map: Moldavia, a small Christian state wedged between the Ottoman Empire, Poland, and Hungary. And Stephen the Great had been a thorn in Ottoman ambitions for years, raiding Ottoman territory, refusing tribute, supporting rebellion. Maimed wanted him destroyed. So he sent the largest invasion force Moldavia had ever faced, commanded by one of his best generals, with orders to annihilate Stephen's army and incorporate Moldavia into the empire. It should have worked. On paper, there was no way 40,000 Moldavians could survive, let alone win. But Stephen didn't fight on paper. He fought in winter, in swamps, in terrain he knew like his own soul. And he turned Maimed's invasion into a catastrophe so complete that the Ottomans wouldn't dare attack Moldavia again for decades. Before we dive into exactly how Stephen pulled off this miracle, here's what I need from you. If this video shows you a battle you've never heard of but absolutely should know, if it proves that faith, preparation, and tactical genius can beat overwhelming odds, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what shocked you most, and subscribe because we're telling the stories that deserve to be legendary. No oversimplified heroics, no sanitized battles, just Stephen the Great doing what he did best, defending his people against impossible odds. That's all I'm asking. Now let's go back 549 years and watch one man stop an empire. Stephen III of Moldavia, known to history as Stephen the Great, was not your typical medieval prince. By 1475, he'd been ruling Moldavia for 22 years. He fought Hungarians, Poles, and Ottomans. He won most of his battles through a combination of brilliant tactics, scorched earth strategies, and an understanding that small nations survive by making conquest too expensive. Stephen didn't have the resources to field massive armies. Moldavia was poor, sparsely populated, wedged between hostile powers, but it had Stephen. And Stephen had proven repeatedly that he was one of the most capable commanders of his generation. Moldavia's strategic position was both blessing and curse. It sat between the Ottoman Empire to the south, Poland, Lithuania to the north, and Hungary to the west. This meant constant threats from multiple directions. But it also meant Stephen could play powers against each other, form temporary alliances, and ensure that no single enemy could focus entirely on conquering him. For years, Stephen had paid tribute to the Ottomans when necessary, allied with Hungary when useful, and maintained independence through cunning and force. But by 1474, Stephen's relationship with the Ottoman Empire had deteriorated completely. He'd supported Wallachian rebels against Ottoman control. He'd raided Ottoman territory in the Balkans. He refused to increase tribute payments, and most provocatively, he defeated a smaller Ottoman force sent to punish him. Maimed II, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, conqueror of Constantinople, scourge of Christendom, was not amused. Stephen was a rebellious vassal who needed to be crushed publicly to discourage other potential rebels. So Maimed planned an invasion on a scale Moldavia had never faced. 3 armies totaling approximately 120,000 men would invade simultaneously from different directions. The main force, about 80,000 strong, would be commanded by Hadim Suleiman Pasha, one of Mehmed's most experienced generals. A secondary force of about 20,000 would invade from the east. Another force of similar size would come from the south through Wallachia. The plan was to converge on Stephen's army, surround him, and destroy him. If Stephen tried to defend against one force, the others would devastate his territory. If he tried to avoid battle, they'd burn Moldavia to the ground until he surrendered. Stephen received intelligence about the invasion in late 1474. His spies in Ottoman territory reported the troop movements. He knew approximately when the attack would come and from which directions. And he knew he was outnumbered catastrophically. Even if he mobilized every able-bodied man in Moldavia, he could field maybe 40,000 soldiers. Against 120,000 Ottomans in the open field, he'd be annihilated. So Stephen didn't plan to fight in the open field. He planned to fight in winter, in terrain that would neutralize Ottoman numerical superiority, using tactics that would turn the invasion into a nightmare. And he prepared meticulously. First, he chose his battlefield. Near the town of Vaslui, in central Moldavia, the terrain was a mix of forests, hills, and marshy ground that would be frozen in January but difficult to traverse. It was defensible, offered concealment for ambushes, and channeled enemy movements into predictable paths. Stephen fortified key positions, prepared fallback routes, and ensured his army knew every trail and forest path. Second, he implemented scorched earth. As the Ottomans approached, Moldavian forces burned everything in their path. Villages, crops, supplies, anything the Ottomans could use. Wells were poisoned or filled. Livestock was driven away. The Ottomans would march through a wasteland, unable to forage, forced to rely on supply lines that Stephen's cavalry would harass constantly. It was brutal for Moldavian civilians who lost their homes, but Stephen compensated them and promised rebuilding after victory. They accepted because the alternative was Ottoman conquest, which meant slavery, forced conversion, and permanent loss. Third, he mobilized completely. Every man who could fight was armed. The Moldavian army was primarily light cavalry and infantry, equipped with bows, spears, and axes. They weren't heavily armored like Western knights or as well-drilled as Ottoman janissaries, but they were tough, knew the terrain, and were defending their homes. Stephen also called for help from allies. Hungary and Poland sent small contingents, maybe a few thousand men total. It wasn't much, but every soldier mattered. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Stephen framed the battle religiously. Moldavia was deeply Orthodox Christian. The Ottomans were Muslim invaders threatening Christendom. Stephen positioned the coming battle as a holy war, defense of the faith, God's test. Priests blessed the army, monks prayed. Stephen himself, a deeply religious man, spent the night before battle in prayer, asking God for victory against impossible odds. This wasn't just propaganda. Stephen genuinely believed God would aid the righteous, and that belief, transmitted to his soldiers, made them willing to fight outnumbered and die if necessary. By early January 1475, the Ottoman armies were converging on Moldavia. The main force under Suleiman Pasha crossed into Moldavia from the south. They marched through burned villages and frozen fields. No food, no shelter. The cold was brutal. Ottoman soldiers, many from warmer regions, suffered from exposure. Supplies were delayed because Moldavian cavalry kept attacking the baggage trains. Morale began to erode even before contact with Stephen's army. Suleiman Pasha knew Stephen was somewhere ahead, but he didn't know exactly where or in what strength. Ottoman scouts reported Moldavian forces in the area, but were ambushed so frequently that reliable intelligence was scarce. Suleiman pushed forward, confident his numbers would overwhelm whatever Stephen fielded. He expected Stephen to either flee or attempt a desperate defense that would be crushed. He didn't expect what was coming. On January 9, 1475, Suleiman's vanguard made contact with Moldavian forces near Vaslui. Small skirmishes erupted. Moldavian cavalry harassed the Ottoman column, fired arrows, retreated. Standard harassment. Suleiman ordered his army to deploy for battle. 80,000 men formed up in traditional Ottoman battle formation. Janissaries in the center, cavalry on the flanks, artillery in support positions. It was an imposing sight, banners flying, drums beating, the largest army Moldavia had ever faced. Stephen watched from elevated ground. His 40,000 men were positioned in the forests and hills surrounding the open ground where the Ottomans deployed. He'd chosen this ground deliberately. The Ottomans thought they were deploying on open terrain suitable for their numbers. In reality, they were in a trap. Forests on three sides limited maneuverability. Marshy ground that was frozen but unstable restricted movement, and Stephen's forces, hidden in the forests, controlled the high ground. The night before the battle, Stephen addressed his commanders. He reminded them they were outnumbered 3-1, but fighting for their homes, their families, their faith. He explained the plan: let the Ottomans deploy, let them advance, draw them into the killing ground, hit them from multiple directions, use the terrain to negate their numbers, and when they break, pursue without mercy, exterminate them. Not because Stephen was cruel, but because mercy meant survivors who'd return with another army. This had to be decisive. That night, Stephen attended a religious service. Monks blessed the army. Soldiers took communion. Many believed they were about to die and wanted their souls prepared. Stephen prayed for hours. Sources describe him weeping, asking God for victory, promising to build churches across Moldavia if God granted him triumph. Whether God heard or not, Stephen's soldiers believed he did, and that faith made them fearless. On the morning of January 10, 1475, the battle began. Suleiman Pasha ordered his army to advance. The Ottoman battle line moved forward, thousands of men in formation. The Janissaries led, professional and disciplined. The cavalry flanked, ready to exploit breaches. It looked unstoppable. Stephen's forces engaged with hit-and-run tactics. Light cavalry fired arrows, retreated, fired again. Moldavian infantry appeared from the forests, threw javelins, disappeared. The Ottomans couldn't pin them down. They advanced deeper into the trap. The ground underfoot became worse. What looked like solid fields were partially frozen marshes. Men sank ankle-deep in mud. Movement slowed. Formations became disordered. And then Stephen sprang the trap. Moldavian forces attacked from three sides simultaneously. Cavalry charged out of the forests into the Ottoman flanks. Infantry poured down from the hills, screaming battle cries, invoking saints and Christ. Artillery that had been hidden fired into the packed Ottoman formations. The Ottomans, caught in bad terrain with their formations disrupted, tried to respond, but the terrain worked against them. Ottoman cavalry tried to charge the Moldavian attackers, but the ground was too unstable for effective charges. Horses stumbled, riders were thrown. Ottoman infantry tried to form defensive lines, but units were spread out, couldn't maintain cohesion. Officers screamed orders that couldn't be heard over the chaos. The battle dissolved into hundreds of separate fights, and in broken terrain, with equal footing, Moldavian fighters, defending their homes, fought with desperate ferocity. Suleiman Pasha tried to rally his center, to push through the Moldavian forces and break out of the trap. The Janissaries formed up and pushed forward, killing Moldavians, gaining ground. Stephen saw this and led a personal counterattack. Sources describe him fighting in the front lines, sword in hand, shouting encouragement. Whether literally true or legendary embellishment, the story reflects that Stephen was a hands-on commander who shared his soldiers' danger. The fighting was brutal. No quarter given. Moldavian soldiers killed wounded Ottomans. Ottoman soldiers, when they had the advantage, did the same. This wasn't chivalric warfare. This was existential. If the Ottomans won, Moldavia would cease to exist. If Stephen won, he'd have to kill enough Ottomans that they wouldn't return. Hours passed. The Ottomans were taking catastrophic casualties. Bodies piled up in the marshes. The frozen ground was slick with blood. Ottoman formations, which had started the day organized and confident, were disintegrating. Units lost contact with each other. Some tried to retreat and ran into Moldavian forces that had circled behind them. Others held ground and were surrounded. By afternoon, the Ottoman army was collapsing. Suleiman Pasha, recognizing the disaster, attempted to organize a retreat. He gathered what cavalry he could and tried to fight his way out. Some units succeeded, breaking through Moldavian lines and fleeing south. Most didn't. Ottoman soldiers threw down their weapons and tried to surrender. The Moldavians killed them. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. Stephen had ordered no prisoners because he couldn't guard, feed, or ransom tens of thousands of prisoners, and leaving survivors meant they'd return in future invasions. This had to be total. The slaughter continued into the evening. Moldavian cavalry pursued fleeing Ottomans through the forests and fields. Small groups of Ottoman soldiers tried to hide or escape. Most were hunted down. The pursuit extended for 30 miles. For 2 days after the battle, Moldavian forces scoured the countryside, finding and killing Ottoman stragglers. The winter cold killed those who escaped immediate pursuit. Wounded men froze to death. Exhausted soldiers collapsed and didn't get up. When it was over, the casualties were staggering. Ottoman dead numbered between 40,000 and 45,000, more than half the invasion force. Another 10,000 to 20,000 were wounded, captured, or died during the retreat. Of the 80,000 Ottomans who entered Moldavia under Suleiman Pasha, maybe 20,000 to 30,000 made it back to Ottoman territory. And those survivors were broken, frostbitten, traumatized. The secondary Ottoman forces, hearing of the disaster, withdrew without engaging. The three-pronged invasion collapsed completely. Moldavian casualties were significant but manageable, maybe 5,000 to 8,000 killed and wounded, a high cost for a small nation, but sustainable. And the captured Ottoman equipment, weapons, armor, horses, supplies, was a windfall that would fund Moldavia's military for years. The battlefield after Vaslui was a frozen hell. Thousands of corpses lay where they'd fallen, slowly buried by snow. Local villagers, returning after the battle, found the field covered in bodies, many half-buried in frozen mud. Scavengers, both animal and human, stripped the dead. Ottoman weapons and armor were collected, melted down, reforged. The dead were left largely unburied until spring, when mass graves were dug. But the scale was such that bodies were found years later. Stephen's first action after victory was to give thanks to God. He attended a service at a nearby monastery, thanking God for the victory. Then he sent messengers to every Christian court in Europe, to the Pope in Rome, to the King of Hungary, to the King of Poland, to the Byzantine refugees in Italy, to anyone who would listen. The message was simple: Moldavia has defeated the Ottoman Empire. The infidel can be beaten. Help us, and together we can drive them back. The response was ecstatic. Pope Sixtus IV, receiving news of the victory, declared Stephen the athlete of Christ, champion of Christendom. He sent letters praising Stephen and urging other Christian monarchs to support Moldavia. Hungary sent gold and supplies. Poland renewed their alliance. Across Europe, Vaslui was celebrated as proof that the Ottoman advance could be stopped. For the Ottoman Empire, Vaslui was a humiliation that echoed through the halls of power in Constantinople. Maimed II was furious. He'd sent one of his largest armies, commanded by an experienced general, to crush a minor principality, and that army had been annihilated. The news damaged Ottoman prestige. Subject peoples wondered if the empire was as invincible as it claimed. Potential rebels were emboldened. And Maimed's political enemies whispered that he was losing his touch. Suleiman Pasha survived the battle and escaped back to Ottoman territory. He was not rewarded. Sources suggest he was stripped of command, possibly executed, though the details are murky. His failure was too great to overlook. Maimed needed a scapegoat, and Suleiman was it. But Maimed wasn't done with Stephen. In 1476, he personally led another invasion of Moldavia, bringing over 150,000 men. This time, Ottoman forces were more cautious, better supplied, and led by the Sultan himself. They devastated Moldavia, won a battle at Valia Alba, where Stephen was forced to retreat, and reached Moldavia's capital. But they couldn't hold territory. Stephen continued guerrilla warfare, and the Ottomans, unable to supply such a large army indefinitely in hostile terrain, withdrew. Maimed had won a tactical victory, but gained nothing strategically, and Vaslui was the reason. Stephen had proven Moldavia couldn't be conquered easily, so even when the Ottomans won, they couldn't capitalize. Mehmed died in 1481. His successors had problems elsewhere and left Moldavia alone. Stephen continued ruling until his death in 1504. He fought dozens more battles, most against the Ottomans, winning the majority. He built fortresses, churches, and monasteries across Moldavia, fulfilling his promise to God. And he's remembered as one of the greatest rulers in Romanian history, the man who defended Christian Europe when no one else could. Let's analyze what actually happened at Vaslui. How did 40,000 Moldavians destroy 80,000 Ottomans? The answer is preparation, terrain, tactics, and psychological warfare. Preparation. Stephen spent months preparing. He chose the battlefield in advance. He implemented scorched earth, denying the Ottomans supplies. He gathered intelligence on Ottoman movements. He fortified positions. He ensured his troops were supplied and motivated. By the time the battle occurred, Stephen had already won half the fight through preparation. Terrain. The battlefield near Vaslui was deliberately chosen to negate Ottoman numerical superiority. Forests restricted visibility and movement. Marshy ground slowed heavy units. Winter cold sapped Ottoman morale and effectiveness. The Moldavians knew the terrain intimately. The Ottomans were fighting blind. Tactics. Stephen used ambush tactics on a strategic scale. He lured the Ottomans into bad terrain, attacked from multiple directions, and didn't give them time to organize. He exploited Ottoman overconfidence, making them think they were advancing on a weaker enemy when they were walking into a trap. And when the trap closed, he pursued without mercy, ensuring the defeat was total. Psychological warfare. Stephen framed the battle religiously, making his soldiers believe God was on their side. The Ottomans, meanwhile, were demoralized by the cold, lack of supplies, and constant harassment. When the battle started, the Moldavians fought with religious fervor. The Ottomans fought for a sultan far away. That difference in motivation mattered, but there's also an element of Ottoman overconfidence and tactical rigidity. Suleiman Pasha advanced into unknown terrain with insufficient scouting. He deployed in a traditional formation that assumed open battle. He didn't adapt when the terrain turned against him. Ottoman commanders had won so many battles through sheer size and professional troop quality that they'd become complacent. They assumed numbers would always win. Vaslui taught them otherwise. The human cost of Vaslui was immense. 40 to 45,000 Ottoman soldiers dead. Most were conscripts from Anatolia and the Balkans, men who had no personal stake in conquering Moldavia. They died in a frozen foreign land because their sultan ordered it. Their families, scattered across the empire, received no word for months. Many probably never learned exactly how their sons or husbands died. They just never came home. For the Moldavians, 5,000 to 8,000 casualties was a huge proportion of a small population. Every family lost someone. Villages were depopulated. But the sacrifice was seen as necessary. Those men died defending their homeland against an empire that would have enslaved or killed them anyway. Their deaths had meaning in the context of national survival. The wounded on both sides suffered horribly. Medieval medicine couldn't treat many injuries. Men with gut wounds died slowly from infection. Amputations were crude. Many wounded died days after the battle from complications. The lucky ones died quickly in combat. The unlucky lingered. Stephen's decision to take no prisoners was militarily sound but morally questionable. He couldn't guard thousands of prisoners. Ransoming them would take years and might fund future Ottoman invasions. Letting them go meant they'd return with another army, so he killed them. It was pragmatic. It was also brutal, and it haunted survivors. Moldavian soldiers who killed surrendering men carried that memory. Some probably justified it religiously. Others probably struggled with it. The pursuit after the battle was where much of the killing occurred. Ottoman soldiers fleeing through winter forests, exhausted, hungry, lost. Moldavian cavalry hunting them down, showing no mercy. It was systematic extermination. Some Ottoman survivors hid for days, then tried to reach safety. only to be killed by villagers or freeze to death. The few who made it back to Ottoman territory told stories of Moldavian forests where the trees seemed to hide enemies, where every shadow could be death. Vaslui had immediate and long-term strategic consequences. Immediately, it stopped the Ottoman invasion cold. Moldavia remained independent. The message to other Ottoman vassals and neighbors was clear: resist, and you might survive. Submit, and you'll be absorbed. This encouraged resistance movements in the Balkans and emboldened Christian states on the frontier. Long-term, Vaslui established Moldavia as a buffer state that the Ottomans couldn't easily conquer. For the next 50 years, Ottoman campaigns into Moldavia were cautious, limited, and often unsuccessful. This gave Hungary and Poland breathing room. It prevented the Ottomans from pushing directly into Central Europe through that route, and it preserved a Christian state on the Ottoman frontier that could serve as an ally for anti-Ottoman coalitions. The battle also had a cultural impact. Stephen became a legend in his lifetime. Stories spread across Europe of the Christian prince who defeated the infidel against impossible odds. Artists painted scenes of the battle. Poets wrote verses celebrating Stephen. He became a symbol of Christian resistance, proof that faith and courage could overcome tyranny. Whether Stephen personally embodied all those virtues is debatable. But the legend mattered as much as the reality. For Orthodox Christianity, Vaslui was a spiritual victory. The Orthodox world had been in retreat since Constantinople's fall in 1453. The Byzantine Empire was gone. Most of the Balkans were under Ottoman control. Orthodoxy seemed doomed to slow extinction. Vaslui showed that Orthodox Christian states could still win, that God hadn't abandoned them. Stephen's religiosity, his church building, his framing of the war as holy, all reinforced this narrative. There's a detail that captures the battle's intensity. After Vaslui, Stephen commissioned a church to be built for every major victory he won. He built 44 churches and monasteries during his reign. Each one was a thank-offering to God and a monument to his soldiers' sacrifice. Those churches still stand in modern Romania and Moldova. They're tourist attractions now, but they were built with Ottoman gold taken from corpses at Vaslui and other battlefields. Sacred architecture funded by the spoils of war. Stephen's relationship with the church was complex. He was genuinely religious, spending hours in prayer, fasting, attending services. But he also used religion pragmatically. He knew that framing wars as holy crusades motivated soldiers and attracted Western support. He walked the line between sincere faith and political calculation. Most rulers did, but Stephen was particularly successful at it. The Pope's reaction to Vaslui is revealing. Sixtus IV desperately wanted a crusade to reclaim Constantinople and push the Ottomans out of Europe. He saw Stephen as a potential leader for that crusade. But Stephen, pragmatic as always, knew a full-scale crusade was beyond Moldavia's capabilities. He won a defensive battle. Offensive campaigns deep into Ottoman territory would bleed his country dry. So he accepted the Pope's praise, took the money and supplies, but avoided committing to impossible ventures. The Hungarian and Polish reactions were similarly pragmatic. They praised Stephen, sent aid, but didn't commit to full military support. They recognized that Moldavia served their interests by tying down Ottoman forces. As long as Stephen kept fighting, the Ottomans couldn't focus entirely on Hungary or Poland. It was cynical but effective. And Stephen understood the game. He played Western powers against each other, extracted maximum support while maintaining independence. Mehmed's second invasion in 1476 showed he'd learned from Vaslui. He brought more troops, moved more carefully, avoided obvious traps. He won the Battle of Vaslui Alba by forcing Stephen into open combat where Ottoman numbers mattered. But even winning didn't give him what he wanted. Moldavia's fortresses held. Stephen's guerrilla tactics bled the Ottoman army. Supply lines were harassed constantly. Eventually, Mehmed had to withdraw because maintaining 150,000 men in hostile territory indefinitely was unsustainable. Vaslui had taught the Ottomans that conquering Moldavia was prohibitively expensive. This gets to a deeper point about asymmetric warfare. Small states can't beat empires in total war, but they can make conquest so costly that empires decide it's not worth it. Stephen understood this. He didn't need to destroy the Ottoman Empire. He just needed to make conquering Moldavia more expensive than it was worth. Vaslui did that by killing 45,000 Ottomans for one province. That's an unsustainable exchange rate for any empire. Modern military analysts study Vaslui as an example of defensive warfare done right. Choose your ground, prepare meticulously, use terrain to offset numerical disadvantage, hit the enemy when and where they're weakest. Pursue ruthlessly to ensure the victory is decisive. These principles apply whether you're Stephen fighting Ottomans or modern guerrillas fighting conventional armies. The technology changes, the principles don't. There's also a lesson about morale and motivation. Stephen's soldiers believed they were fighting for their homes, families, and faith. They had everything to lose. The Ottoman soldiers were fighting for conquest, for their sultan's ambitions. When the battle got hard, when casualties mounted, the Moldavians had reasons to keep fighting. The Ottomans had reasons to question why they were dying in a frozen swamp thousands of kilometers from home. That difference decided battles. If you're still watching, I want your thoughts. Could Stephen have won without the religious framing? Was the massacre of prisoners justified militarily? And what would have happened if Stephen had lost at Vaslui? Drop your answers in the comments. Let's debate properly. And if this story showed you a battle that deserves to be as famous as Agincourt or Cannae, if you appreciate military history that respects both the brilliance and the brutality, hit that subscribe button. We are building a community that values real history, not oversimplified, not sanitized, real. Where people make hard choices and pay for them in blood. That's what we do here. Vaslui matters because it shows that empires can be stopped, that small nations with brilliant leadership and committed populations can survive against overwhelming odds, but it also shows the cost. 5,000 to 8,000 Moldavians dead, 45,000 Ottomans dead, villages burned, families destroyed. Victory, even total victory, is paid for in blood and suffering. There are no clean wars. That's the lesson of Vaslui. Stephen won, Moldavia survived, the Ottomans were stopped for decades. And all it cost was tens of thousands of lives, years of guerrilla warfare, and turning Moldavia into a battlefield. Was it worth it? For the Moldavians who lived, probably yes. For the dead on both sides, no answer exists. They're just corpses in frozen mud, remembered or forgotten depending on which side they fought for. Now you know what happened at Vaslui, not a fairy tale where good triumphed over evil through divine intervention. A brutal winter battle where superior preparation, knowledge of terrain, and ruthless tactics beat numerical superiority. You know why it mattered, why Europe celebrated, and why the Ottomans learned to respect a small Christian principality they dismissed as insignificant. That's the story worth telling. That's what we do here. Real history, the kind where victories cost as much as defeats, where heroes make morally questionable decisions, and where survival requires compromises that haunt you. More stories coming, more battles, more moments where everything hung by a thread and human decisions, for better or worse, changed the world. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.